All right, talk about mastering, we're talking about the end of the process. So let's go backwards. When you talk about mastering, you've got to talk about loudness. When you talk about loudness, then we have to talk about dynamic range. Talk about dynamic range, let's say that that's the difference between the loudest parts of the recording and the quietest parts of the recording. So then we should find some way to define how we measure that, so we're all talking about the same thing. There are a couple of different ways. The first way I'd like to talk about is what peak levels are. So I looked this up, and I got something here that says, since the recorded material is stored as the representation of varying electrical current as provided by a transducer, which represents the varying acoustical air pressure as said varying electrical current in either an analogous or digital representation, then indicating the largest absolute value of the aforementioned modulation would represent the largest instantaneous read peak value. Okay, so that just means you measure the loudest part, and that's the peak value. However, this ignores the idea that music changes over time, and it would be good to know when the peak levels happen so that we could relate it to something that's in the music. So if you get a peak level reading that's really high on beats 2 and 4 of every bar, and the snare happens to be on 2 and 4, then it's probably the snare that's really loud and causing the peak level value. Well, we care because all recording devices have a maximum peak level that they're designed to operate at, so that as long as you put a signal in that's at or below that peak level, then what will come out of the box looks reasonably like what went into it, plus or minus whatever the box did. If you exceed that level, then you end up with unintentional distortion. Now, you can do that on purpose, which means it's not unintentional, but that's a topic for another time. As it happens, our hearing is pretty tolerable of occasional peaks. Literally, they're just too fast for us to perceive. So, especially in the analog domain, where if you have a little bit over the maximum specified level, it just makes a little bit of distortion, and if you go a lot over, it makes a lot of distortion. A few mild peaks, totally tolerable, no problem. However, in the digital domain, where there is no such subtlety, as soon as you go over a little bit, it makes a whole lot of distortion and really should be avoided. Now, I just said that peak level distortion may be too fast for us to perceive. That's really an interesting statement when it comes to figuring out what makes things loud, because that applies to something that calls average level. Average level, sometimes known as RMS, or root mean square, sometimes known as VU or volume.